Hi folks, welcome back to Pete's Picks number 5. This wasn't the one I was planning on doing, but I was trawling Discogs beginning of the week, and I came across a couple of sellers who were selling some interesting stuff at very cheap prices, between £3 and £8. So I thought, you can't resist. You've got to have some of that. I ended up buying a dozen albums from the two sellers. So let's go and see what I bought. First three are by the same artist, and that is Michael Chapman, who is a English singer-songwriter. Started off in the late 1960s. I think his first album was 69, but he'd been around a couple of years before that. A great singer-songwriter, great guitarist as well. He's just turned 80, I think, in January this year, and up to 2019 he was still recording and touring. He was originally on Harvest, and his music then was probably more acoustic singer-songwriter based with some backing. When his deal with Harvest stopped, he went on to other labels and went a little bit more electric. And this is his 1974 album on the DRAM label. This is a New Zealand pressing. Let's see. DRAM. This is excellent stuff. On here he's backed basically by the Steel Ice Band rhythm section of Rick Kemp on bass and Nigel Pegram on drums. He's also got Maddie Pryor on backing vocals and Bridget St. John on backing vocals. The only time I ever saw him live, Bridget St. John was the support act. Both of them are excellent. He doesn't get the credit he deserves. I think if you like people like Roy Harper, you should like Michael Chapman. He was born in, I think, in Yorkshire, but I think he lives now here in Cumbria. The second album of his I got was this one, The Man Who Hated Mornings. I think this one is from 1967. And this one is on the Decca label. And on this album, he backed by a rhythm section of Keith Hartley on drums and Rod Clements, the bassist, with Lindisfarne. But you've also got people like B.J. Cole on here on steel guitar. Andy Latimer of Camel plays on a couple of tracks as well. Again, up to his usual high standard. And the third album I picked up of his was this one from 1980, and this is Looking for 11. Not heard this one. And this one is on the Criminal Records label, and on here he's backed by Rod Clements on bass and also Ray Laidlaw of Lindisfarne on drums.
Well, I think I've stayed a little too long and had too much to drink. My legs don't seem to work no more, my brain don't seem to think. I'm face to face with the door, keeping my feet on the floor. My lover don't need me no more.
So that's that one. The The next two albums are also by the same artist, and that's the Polish violinist Michał Urbaniak. This is his album Fusion from 1974. This is on CBS. He's played with everybody as Michał Urbaniak, all the greats of the jazz fusion scene, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, people like that. This was originally released as under the name of his other band, Michał Urbaniak's Constellation, but renamed Fusion. I've got one other album by this band from 1973, I think. It's a live album that's very good, but I've not heard this one yet. This one is also by Michał Urbaniak, and this is his band Michał Urbaniak's Fusion, and the album Smiles Ahead. Terrible cover. As on the other one, he has his wife Ursula Dudziak, sorry for pronunciation, on vocals, but she doesn't sing any lyrics. She uses her voice more as an instrument. The rest of the band are all American jazz musicians. First couple of tracks, if you like sort of Jean-Luc Ponty or Mahavishnu with Jerry Goodman, but minus the guitar of John McLaughlin, you probably like this. Third track, Piece for 15 Strings, is a duet for stick and violin, and the stick's played by Emmett Chapman, the inventor of the instrument. Must be one of the first uses of it. The second side starts off with a really funky track written by the bassist, but after that it gets very more experimental, and Ursula takes, basically takes over in so many ways on this one. And Michał plays lyricon more than he does violin. The lyricon being an electric wind instrument, looks a bit like either a soprano saxophone or a clarinet, but it's very good. How much you like this might depend on whether you can take Ursula's vocals. I don't really like them. I don't usually like vocals in fusion music, but as I said, this one is just her voice being used as an instrument. Moving on, a bit more jazz rock, but back to Britain, and we've got Backdoor. This is their first album. It was released originally in 1972 on as a private pressing, but then taken up by Warner Brothers for this release. Backdoor were a jazz rock trio of Colin Hodgkinson on Fender bass, Ron Asbury on alto and soprano saxophones and flute, and Tony Hicks on drums. So no guitar, no keyboards. They were very popular in the Northeast before they got their recording contract. I think they did about 4 albums. This is totally instrumental. They did introduce vocals, I think, on future albums, and eventually I think they introduced Dave McRae on keyboards on their 3rd album. I'm looking forward to hearing this. Should be interesting. Next up, a famous name, and that's Captain Beefheart with his 2nd album, Strictly Personal. This is a UK reissue on the Budget Sunset label. After his sort of bluesy 1st album, I think this takes him more down the experimental route, though the producer, Bob Krasno, without the band's knowledge, put a lot of phasing and other psychedelic effects on the recording before it was released. And I don't think the captain was too happy with that. But listening to it, I like it. I mean, I've always liked things like phasing, but this is a really good album. Now, some of the tracks were from these sessions, which was in April and May 1968, were subsequently released on the album Mirror Man, which I think is a great album. It has Mirror Man on there and Candy Corn, which are also on here. The version of Mirror Man is 15 minutes long on the other album, but this is a good album. I only need now his later albums, then I should have a complete set. Excellent.
I'll see it down while I wash my face. Drop some drops for the match trail in the wrong place. Whoa, open up my blouse, I see spiders spinning my place. Safe in milk, place. Safe in milk. I never heard it put quite that way. Being shaped by millions of all the way they call the day, they call the day.
Next up, we have the American flautist Paul Horn with Nexus. This was released in 1975 on, I think, on the Epic label. Now I have one other album by Paul Horn, which is a double album, 1 track per side, solo flute recorded inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, and it's really good. I wasn't sure what to expect of this, but it was £3, so I thought I'll try it. Nexus, it seems, there's no credits on this album. I think it's missing an inner sleeve of some sort. But it seems Nexus are a 6-piece percussion group, soul percussion, playing lots of exotic types of percussion. And I love percussion music, I really do. So I think this could be really good. I think this will incorporate different types of world music with a flute on top. It could be a bit new age-ish, but I'm expecting it to be a decent album. prog. Couldn't show any albums without showing some prog. And this is the Dutch band Earth and Fire. Now, I'd only heard some, this is their album Atlantis, recorded I think in 1973. It was their third album. The title track takes up the whole of the first side. It's prog, but more. I'd only heard some later stuff by them and they'd gone very poppy. I think they always did have a pop element to them. But this album, and I think the second album, meant to be their most progressive ones. Thanks to, I think, to the introduction of the Mellotron. So I'm hoping that this will be a good listen. This is a UK pressing on Polydor. I wish I managed to get an original Dutch pressing, because that's got a nice double gatefold sleeve. Well, this UK edition is just this single sleeve with a different cover. But it'd be interesting to hear what this is like.
Trumpets, tubas, trombones, resound. What profaner, look closer, a bigger than comes. Which musicians play so loud and so pure? Tunes of trumpets, tubas, trombones resound. Tunes of trumpets, tubas, trombones resound.
Next up is probably the most famous Spanish prog band of their era, and that's Triana with their album Hijos del Abobio? Can't read that. Hijos del Agobio. Excuse the pronunciation. This sort of grotesque cover. This is their second album, released in 1977. It's meant to be very much in that sort of Italian prog vein of the early 70s, but with that Spanish twist. Flamenco plays, I think, a part in their influences on this and other albums. 77 is a bit late for sort of prog albums, but I think in Spain, thanks to the Franco regime, they were playing catch up. Franco only died, I think, in 75, so this music flourished, a bit later than it did elsewhere in Europe. But I've heard so much about these, never heard them. Again, when it was going so cheap, I thought I've got to give it a go. Gets good write-ups, so I'm hoping this will be a winner.
Cien fuerzas que inundan el corazón, te separan de ti, te separan de ti. Quiero sentir algo que me huela a vida, que mi sangre corra loca de pasión, descubrir la música que hay en la risa, la luz profunda y el amor.
Next up, one I've been wanting for a long time, and that is Renaissance's first album. There's the band. This was, when was this released? It's on the Island label, 1969. Now this is not the lineup of the classic lineup of, that's considered the classic lineup of anyway of Renaissance. This was this arose out of the ashes of the Yardbirds. When the Yardbirds split up, Keith Relf, their vocalist, and Jim McCarty, their percussionist, decided to carry on. They wanted to go in a more sort of a folk-based vein. They needed a band, so they got John Hawken in on piano, and he brought a much more classical feel to the music. And so the music on here is that sort of progressive classical folk hybrid. They also brought in Louis Chinamo on bass, and as a backing vocalist and a lead vocalist at times, they brought in Keith's sister Jane on vocals. This is a classic album. I really love this one. It was released in 1969, like I said, about the same time as King Crimson's In the Court of the Crimson King. Now that's usually classed as the very first full-on prog album, but this, I think, must go down as one of the very first prog albums as well. It's absolutely superb, especially the first track, Kings and Queens. Unfortunately, this lineup sort of collapsed during the recording of their second album, Illusion. And by the third album, it was a totally different lineup. That's when Annie Haslam came in, and Michael Dunford and all the others. And that's considered the classic period of Renaissance. This lineup did try and reform in 1977, I think, under the name Illusion, which was the title of their second album. But unfortunately, during rehearsals, Keith Relf was fatally electrocuted. The band did carry on and recorded a really good album, to be honest. I think it was called Out of the Mist or something like that. But this is well worth having if you like this early prog. Finally, this one I really did enjoy, I've got to admit. And this is the Liverpool Scene with the Amazing Adventures of the Liverpool Scene. Here you go. Full picture. This is on the RCA label, recorded I think in 1969. It opens up inside rather than on the outside. Now, the Liverpool Scene came out of the whole of the Liverpool Poets, and it's a poetry and music band. The music incorporates free jazz to rock with a lot of folk influences. But I thought this was brilliant. The band at the time were Andy Roberts, who was on Plain Song. I showed their album recently. He's on vocals and guitar. You've got the two poets, Adrian Henry and Mike Evans, who also provide some saxophone. You've got singer-songwriter Mike Hart on vocals and guitar. He did a couple of albums for John Peel's Dandelion label. You've got Percy Jones, the bassist, who went on to play with Brand X, and Brian Dodson on drums. The album is supposedly produced by John Peel, but in his own words, his production involved sitting there and enjoying it. I've got a feeling that executive producer Sandy Robertson was the main producer. On here you've got, it starts off with a superb Tramcat Frankenstein with free jazz and free rock over underneath the poetry. You've got the amazing adventures of Che Guevara, which is on 4 parts spread across the album, which is basically spoken pieces of just made up news headlines. You've got singer-songwriter type material by Andy Roberts and Mike Hart. You've got Love Story, which is a great poem by Adrian Henry with a sort of raga backing by Andy Roberts. Got Bat Poem, which uses the music from the Batman theme. I thoroughly enjoyed this. This is an excellent album. I think they did 4 albums. I've got to try and find the other 3 if I can get them cheaply enough. I'm surprised to find this. Never seen it before. But if you like that mixture of poetry and music, it could be up your street. Worth trying.
Help us out in Vietnam, Batman. Help us drop that bat napalm, Batman. Help us bomb those jungle towns, spreading pain and death around. Coke and candy wins them round, Batman. Help us smash the Viet Cong, Batman. Help us show them that they're wrong, Batman. Help us spread democracy, get them high on LSD, make them just like you and me, Batman.
Right, that's it. Just want to say my competition, 200 subs competition, is still running. Thanks for everybody who's entered so far. I set up a playlist of those entries. If you're not on there and you've done an entry, please let me know, because I might have missed it. But if anybody else wants to enter, I'll leave it running for another couple of weeks. Hopefully 1 or 2 more will try it. I know it's not exactly an original concept, but hope you might enjoy it. Anyway, take care everyone. All the very best. See you soon.